Good evening. I want to convene the regular meeting of the Brattleboro Select Board. We know that the meeting has been properly warned because we were here at 5:45 and went into executive session. Our first order of business is to approve the minutes of the October 9th and October 16th meetings. Would somebody like to make a motion?
So moved.
We have a motion to approve the minutes for the October 9th and the October 16th board meetings. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? Motion carries 4-0. And I will note that we have one member of the board who could not be here this evening. Chair's remarks. Well, Peter's going to say this, but first, since the time is ticking, I'm going to remind people that you have 45 or 43 minutes to vote. So if you haven't voted, go to the American Legion on Linden Street. I have one thing to report about. Governor Scott came here with members of his cabinet on his, Capital for a Day.
Campaign for a Day.
Yeah. It was pre-November. It was about 2 weeks ago. Brandy was there. Obviously, I was there. Peter was there. We had members of our administration there. And we had about an hour-long meeting. We explained some of the good things that are happening in town because we want people from the north to know what kind of a town we are. We thanked the state for the partnerships that we've had on some of the projects that we've had. But we've also explained to them some of the issues or challenges that are facing us and said, if there's opportunities where you can help us or we can partner, we would very much like to do that. And Brandy was very eloquent on talking about the issues of poverty and homelessness and drug addiction and, making the state aware that it's just not a Brattleboro problem, it's a bigger problem. So Brandy did a great job on that. So we'll see where we go, and hopefully we'll continue to have conversations with the people at the state level and get some of the things that we need. So that's all I have to report. Would the town manager have anything?
Thank you.
I took one of them away.
You did. I'll just reiterate that there's now 41 minutes left until 7 o'clock, and the voting is continuing until 7 o'clock at the American Legion on Linden Street. And one other reminder, this has also been from the continuing series of reminders, but as we've had the 2 separate weeks of leaf collection, we adjusted this year. I want to remind people we tried to accommodate the changing climate and the way the leaves are falling differently than they have in the past. Last year we found that we had quite a lot of negative feedback that the second collection of leaves was too early and there was still a lot of leaves on the trees. This year we actually somehow managed to hit that sweet spot where when we went out on October 26th to do the first collection, people were saying, "Where have you been?" And now this coming Friday is the second one, and I know there's still a lot of leaves on the trees. So we'll continue to try to work with the calibration of this as we see changes in how the leaves change and fall. But this year, the reminder is that this Friday, November 9th, is the final leaf pickup for the year. So if you have some more leaves to clean up in your yard, please do that in the next couple of days. We are supposed to actually have a couple of nice days. The rain is supposed to clear out tonight. So fill up those big paper bags with leaves and put them out at the curb for Friday morning. There'll be townwide leaf collection. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone else on the select board have any comments or committee reports that they'd like to give at this time? David?
Well, it's a request, I guess, that we ask the Public Works Department to contact the state about the failing paint at the Route 9, Route 5 Rotary. Yeah. They came finally after all these years and painted the lanes so that people have some sense or some possibility of understanding how it's supposed to work. Mm-hmm. And now the paint is coming off in large...
Really?
Yeah, and it's big pieces and they're all over the really plants in the median and up against the curbs, and it looks like somebody threw away a whole bunch of white paper towels. But
is that today?
It's
over the last several days.
Yeah.
I'll reach out for them tomorrow. I know that there were people there on Sunday evening. It looked like private contractors and V-Trans personnel were on site, and it looked to me as though they were assessing the
There's some pretty remarkable
Problem.
large slices or
Yeah,
pieces
yeah.
that came off.
Yeah.
And the other thing is a follow-up on our goals. I didn't want to put this on the agenda because I don't really have anything to talk on the agenda, but I would like on the next agenda to follow up on the conversation about our housing goal. I've
Yeah.
had continued to have some conversations, and I wanted to get the board's input on what we want to do about it. What are the questions that we might want to be asking? Who would we want to ask them of, or who would we want to have them participate? I think this is something that's very complex and controversial, so we need a pretty high level of community engagement. And then what kind of event, or what would the process be that would be welcoming and inclusive and enable people to participate, and also enable us to get some clarity in terms of if there's anything that we can do to move the process forward. So I wanted to draft a few of those ideas and send them to include in the packet when we send it out, and I'll get it to you before Friday, I promise. And then have that on the agenda, if that's okay. Great, thanks.
Are there any other select board comments or committee reports?
I don't have anything.
I don't either.
Right. Now it's time for public participation, and this is time in the agenda where people can talk about something that is not on tonight's agenda. And I see Stuart. Yes. If for the viewing audience, if you would tell us who you are and where you're from.
I'm Stuart McDermott from 80 Canal Street. Before I sought legal action, a select board member suggested that I first come and speak here tonight so that I and the town would not incur needless expense. I speak to a point of discrimination, elitism, and the town being taken advantage of. I draw your attention to 4 homes at 72, 76, 80, and 84 Canal Street. To help orient you, I ask you think of the small commercial complex of Portland Glass, the auto parts store, and Code 3. Facing these businesses, the homes that I speak of are to the left or to the east of Code 3. All of our businesses and homeowners here in Vermont, of course, have to deal with snow. Where to put it? And it is an obvious expense, especially for businesses. The owner of this commercial complex has been pushing his snow into Canal Street in front of our 4 homes for a number of years. To help orient you and so that you see and understand better, I have made these pictures
Oh, great.
to show you exactly, exactly what I'm talking about. As you can see, the north side of the road, the plows are able to go completely up that side on past Three Stones Restaurant. Now these piles that are pushed in front of our homes can remain there for days and sometimes weeks, obstructing our driveway and access to the front of our homes. The plows go up the opposite side of the street with their blades on the curb. There's quite a difference, as you can see, but when the plows come down the other side of the street, they are forced to go around these large piles before they continue on down the street. And as I said, the piles may sit there for days or weeks. It has been the past that the town is supposed to come along and clean up this business's snow piles. Why are we treated differently than other residents in town? In the past, there has been discussion about people taking advantages of Brattleboro services and that Brattleboro should shoulder the cost. This owner lives out of state, and more important, why should the town have to incur this business's snow removal expense? I have been told that in the front of our homes is a wide part of the street and the snow can be stored there. Why can it be stored in front of our homes? Other businesses may have to store their snow and then have it removed. This business, I think, could do the same as any other business. I am here tonight to ask, since I have had no help from the Department of Public Works with Steve Barrett, I'm here to ask that this practice be stopped and that our section of the town street be treated equally as others. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And I'm assuming the rest of the board would sort of have our town manager
Yes.
talk to Steve
Sure.
and maybe give us
Please.
a report.
Absolutely.
Yeah. We'll
So-
be getting a report.
Thank you.
We will look into this.
Want me to take those pictures back?
Oh,
Could we keep one of them?
Of course.
Yeah, here, we'll give you one and we'll save one so that we remember.
Thank you.
We'll keep it.
Thanks, Stuart.
Thank you, Stuart. Yes. Pete, please come on up. Yep. And remember, introduce yourself.
My name's Nick Nickerson from Brattleboro, by way of the South for many years. I want to mention to you the stoplight right in front of Hannaford's. It has a ridiculous two-car
I know.
left-hand
Yes.
signal into and equally ridiculous left-hand signal out of. Now,
It's more like one car.
you're exactly right.
That's if
Chair?
they get right on it.
Yeah.
Because I noticed today, the second car had, before he got completely under it, he had a yellow light. Of course, he couldn't see it by then. But it's absurd, and this is not rocket science, I don't believe, to have it lengthen 2 more car lengths. I've asked the people inside and the Hannaford employees, and they're loath to get into anything political, and they just say, well, it's been going on for a long time. So, their guys are here now. They're taking, I believe they're taking cores out of the red rock around Putney Road last couple of days. So they're here, so why can't they lend a hand and help us this way too? Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll pass that on to V-Trans along
Yeah.
with the concern about the paint.
Yeah.
yeah.
Nick, I think we found an issue we can all agree on. The timing of that light is ridiculously
It's totally
short. And it is the
It's-
state.
It's a state.
And
Thing,
it's
but-
discouraging to
Yeah.
customers, myself included. I mean, I won't go in there sometimes, I know if I'm going home that way,
Yeah, it drives you
I don't
crazy.
go.
And why, when you're coming north, a lot of people cut in at whatever that is.
Yeah.
Where the,
Chickering.
Yeah.
Chickering, yeah.
you know that trick, right?
Yep. Are there any other public comments on issues that are not on tonight's agenda? Seeing none, I'd like to convene as health commissioners. Would someone like to make a motion?
So moved.
We have a motion to convene as health commissioners. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Motion carries 4-0. We're basically convening so that I can tell you the issue that we were supposed to speak about, which was a possible health order on 33 Oak Street, has been removed from the agenda. Our town health officer, Deputy Fire Chief Len Howard, has been talking with the landlord, and they've been making some progress. And I think they're going to meet again on November 13th. And Deputy Chief Howard will let us know if it ever needs to come back on the select board agenda. Does anyone have any questions about that?
Nope.
Nope.
Thanks.
All right.
Happy to hear it.
Yes.
That there's movement.
Keep things moving. Thank you. Now we can adjourn as liquor health commissioners. Like someone would like to make a motion?
So moved.
We have a motion to adjourn as health commissioners. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries 4-0. Next up is new business. And the first order of new business is we had a request from Stephanie Keith and Fritz Engstrom to come and talk to us about the light that's adjacent to their property. So we want to hear from you folks. And you can come up here and sit at the table. Make it comfortable. And for the viewers, if you introduce yourself.
Yep.
And that won't amplify your voice here. It makes it so that the people on BCTV can hear you.
Well, thank you very much. I'm Frederick Engstrom. I go by Fritz. I appreciate you putting this on the agenda.
Stephanie Keith.
And we own the house at 39 Western Avenue. And just so we can orient you a bit, recently Department of Public Works put in a blinking light that many of you have seen around town. There's one outside the retreat, there's one near the Holton home, there's others, I believe, in Western Brat. But its shape is basically a solar panel at top, a flashing light at approximately 14 feet high, a picture of a pedestrian. As you see, I did not major in human art form. Below that is a sign with an arrow showing that there's a crosswalk, then there's a control box, and then there's a push button. And I'm going to make the case that first, there ought not to be lights here. That may be a done deal with the Traffic Safety Committee, but I'm going to make it. I'm also going to make the case that we've had very poor service from the town manager. And I'm finally going to make the case that these blinking lights, if they are going to stay, ought to be either here, below the picture of the stick figure of the human being, or below even the arrow sign. Mr. Elwell sent us publications regarding these signs, and from a organization called TAPCO, and they then refer to these national standards on signs across the United States called MUTCD, which is an acronym that I can't memorize, but it's over 150 pages. What's interesting, so we appreciate his sending that. However, the communication and consultation in this process has been poor. First of all, we were not advised of the plan at all. When they started building the reconfigured sidewalks at this intersection, even though we were the homeowners most involved, no one contacted us. So that the issues are several, all of which relate to living with a blinking light, which incidentally blinks so that it goes into my son's bedroom, which affects property value significantly. I was thinking of doing a presentation with a flashing light, and you could experience what that would be like to live with that day in and day out. The placement of the crosswalk was always at the intersection, and then part of this plan, again, we were not consulted on it, suddenly it went exactly into our yard. It lined up with our internal sidewalk so that people would cross and go in. Now, Steve Barrett was kind enough to, at that point, listen and help put a door in there and some other work, which we appreciated. Second, there was a plan then to have a build out on both sides of the road, like concrete would come out on both sides so that the flashing light poles could each be on there. Without consulting us, they decided to get rid of the build out on our side, so now the flashing light is well onto our property and not the couple more feet out that it could have been. Again, we were not consulted. Finally, the decision to add a blinking light, no one talked about that. I will point out that I'm not aware of any blinking lights in Brattleboro in front of someone's residence. The ones I'm aware of are in front of organizations like the Brattleboro Retreat or the Holton Home or other businesses were the only ones. And so it feels like an old boys club that we're told after the fact and not consulted. When we pointed this out to Mr. Elwell, who said initially, we will work with you getting it lower. When the lights went in with no accommodation, we got an email back, and I believe I sent that to the board, saying, oh, I forgot to circle back. Even though there is an apology in there, there's not really an apology, because a true apology means, why don't we work on this together? And that was never offered. In fact, when I talked to one of the people constructing it, it was a rather rude interchange where he said, tough, this is the way it is. I'm first going to make the case now that there ought to be no lights there. Now, the Agency of Transportation in Vermont did not fund this because they did not think that it was indicated. Now, I don't know why they did not think it was indicated, but the helpful materials that were provided us gives at least 3 reasons why lights would be contraindicated at this intersection. First, the materials, which I can easily cite, that you gave to us indicate that these lights are ideal for high-speed roads. This is not a high-speed road. I think it's 25 miles per hour there. Second, it's ideal for multiple lane highways. This is not a multiple lane highway. Third, it's, quote, it shall not be used for crosswalks across approaches controlled by yield signs, stop signs, etc. There are two stop signs. There's Cedar Street and Union Hill. Now you might ask yourself, why is this? Why would they even have that requirement? Until you think about what goes on at this intersection. Union Hill, of course, is very steep, and if you're going up that, it's dangerous. You're at a stop sign. Imagine, particularly if you're not a local and you don't know this intersection, suddenly you can go across and you're faced with a blinking light and you don't know what in the world to do. Similarly with Cedar Street, it's very hard to make a turn. Suddenly you may see a light, and so that these lights would likely, and according to the research in this MUTCD that Mr. Elwell gave to us, it actually causes more accidents and more harm if people are given multiple signs at intersections. So leaving aside, so I have actually the handouts for that. If you'd like to see some of it, it's, you know, tedious. But if we take the fact that there are going to be lights there, which, as I said, I think is a bad idea. The question is, why can't they be lowered? And in the TAPCO website that was provided to us, Mr. Elwell pointed out the last sentence, which was, any variations from the guidelines is strongly discouraged to avoid safety and liability concerns, and this is mentioned elsewhere. Interestingly, it's the town of Brattleboro that has been violating the recommendations from their own vendor from TAPCO. If you go to the TAPCO website, and we have some pictures here. Unfortunately, our color printer is not industrial grade.
Thank you.
But there's 7 times that they show these pictures.
On their website, they show these flashing lights. They have a nice little video. 7 times they show these setups. 6 of them, they have the flashing lights between the person. 6 of them have the flashing lights right here between the person and the arrow, and the 7th is right here. And I checked the installation of the blinking lights, and they're put on with a very simple clamp. This is very easy to move. So there should be, I would think the town would want to have them placed appropriately. And if you look at research on sign placement, which unfortunately was part of my past life, best signs are roughly at people's eye level. And you'll go to the MUTC guidelines. They recommend all these signs be between about 5 and 9 or 5 and 10 feet, not up to 13 feet, which is above our hedge. So that, unfortunately, Brattleboro is violating their contract with TAPCO, and I think TAPCO actually had some very good points. So our interest is in not having any light at all, but particularly no visible blinking light. TAPCO says, quote, there are multiple choices of sign and size. They mention on the sheet that I gave you that the blinking light should in general be placed between the sign and the arrow plaque. They say that as I said, 7 of 7 displays on the website all show the lights at a lower placement. If you go to Turner's Falls, which I do occasionally, they have it at roughly 7 feet high. And so what do we recommend? Obviously, our preference is to have no lights. We think it's dangerous and not helpful and gives people a false sense of security. And we already have 2 crossing guards there in the morning, and I've never seen them both at work at the same time. So there's plenty of person power during school days. But if we are going to have lights, they should definitely be lower. And if this is going to stay like this, I would like to have an independent appraisal that we could agree on about how much our property has been devalued because of these blinking lights. Finally, in the spirit of helping the select board, my understanding is one of the major tasks of the select board is to hire and evaluate a town manager. We hope that you, next time you do that on an annual basis, that you take this example into consideration for how poorly we have been dealt with.
I would like to just to speak to that, which is that we had met together and you had said to me, I'm sure we can adjust the height and that wouldn't be a problem, that you would talk to Steve and that you were going to work with us. And then you emailed that, a summarization saying that. And then that didn't happen. And again, like I said, you said weekly, oh, sorry, I didn't circle back. But circle back is not the definition of, I'll do this and I'm going to work with you. And so you may not like my manner, you may not like any of the interchanges, but your job is to work with people and to do what you say you'll do. And if you're not going to do that, to say, I'm not going to do what I said I would do. And so it's a whole year has gone by and time not, that the circling back didn't happen. So I feel like this is the third apology I've gotten from the town. Initially, when those changes were made, they said, sorry, we didn't see you there. We consulted every neighbor but you. And when I asked the town for chickens and to have a rooster, I had to give a plan to everyone here and a letter to all the neighbors around me, because if I had a chicken, it might affect their property. So when the town makes a decision that affects our properties, I expect that we would be consulted and, as you said, worked with. So I can say, individually as that interchange, that I don't feel like we were worked with. And again, circling back to announce something is not a working with.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone on the board want to start with any questions? Or I have a couple, but do you want to?
Okay.
Do you want to, I think the first question is for the town. How is it determined that the blinking light, like who determines that that light goes there?
Sure.
Do you know what I mean? How is that process?
The recommendation initially is made by the Public Works Department, or in some cases it might be by a consultant who's assisting in the design of a improvement like the intersection improvement at Union Hill and Western Avenue. And then it's reviewed by the Traffic Safety Committee to decide what are proper locations for these kinds of installations. And then as part of the town's budget, the select board actually was involved in this one. The select board wouldn't always be involved. If it's just a sign or something inexpensive, then it might be implemented without select board approval. But if it's something that requires specific funding, or as this one did, in this case, a grant application, then the select board's also involved in the decision to move forward.
So this is one of the ones that we got some grant money for.
Right.
Because there's some
The
that.
state paid for half and the town paid for
Okay.
half.
Because like the one by the retreat and the one by BMH, didn't they kick in money for?
Correct.
Okay, so these were the ones.
At
The
the
school
retreat,
kicked in for the one at the county.
Right, okay.
and, right, and the school paid. So there are 3 different locations where a nearby property owner shared the cost, and then the others that have been installed in town have been installed as a 50-50 cost sharing between the state and the town.
Okay, so this was one of those, and that was like, well, that was when Dick DeGray was on the board, I think.
Yes,
So it was a
that's
couple
correct.
years ago, okay. Knowing nothing about mechanical things, and literally I know nothing, and so your diagram and stuff is helpful. I know nothing about how it works.
We didn't either.
Yeah. And maybe you can't answer this either, Peter. I'm not going to put you on the spot for something you can't answer. I think one of the questions is this, because they're all around town, they all have the light up at the top?
Yes.
Like they're all the same around town?
I can speak to the standard. So we certainly would concede that there are installations in other communities that vary from the MUTCD standard. In confirming with Steve Barrett, who wasn't able to be here tonight, but when I was preparing for this conversation, I reconfirmed with him that the standard that we use is not just our standard, but is to be compliant with the MUTCD. He provided me documentation of that it is. And in fact, one of the concerns here is height, that there's a specification that says it's to be between 13 and 15 feet high, and that the pole that this one is on is
But
a
not the
13-foot
light.
pole.
It says the pole has to be that high.
Correct.
Nowhere in the materials you gave us did it say the light should be that high. And you also provided us with something from TAPCO that said that they have a variety of ones that all meet the MUTCD guidelines.
So, again, my response is that, to our belief, Steve Barrett's and mine, the installations that we put in town, which are consistent throughout the community, are those that meet the MUTCD standards. We know that there are some deviations. As you see this type of an installation elsewhere, there are some deviations from that.
Is that light attached with a clamp?
I don't know exactly how it's
I
attached.
took a photo with my cell phone and it is.
Yeah.
It is attached with a
Yes.
clamp?
You want to weigh in, Tim?
Sure. I walk there a couple times a week with my son. I went recently because I knew this was coming up on the agenda. And I have to say, I feel this light is absolutely essential. Absolutely essential where it is. Because it's not a regular light. I live near the corner of High and Oak, so I'm quite familiar with what it's like for a blinking light to be constantly coming into your home. Of course, I had the advantage of when I bought the home, that's what was going on there. But I think
And that's a very important point. Thank you.
the wonderful thing about this light is that it only flashes when you push it, when you need it, when you're crossing the street. So you can make an argument that there's a certain amount of time that it's going to be affecting anybody around there. I also noticed, and you could confirm this or if you want, that when you're not directly in the line of its intentional path of the light, is it an LED or?
Yeah.
It's very directional, so that if you come off of the light, say 45, 50, 60 degrees, the reduction in the light that's actually hitting your eyes is quite significant. That's something I noticed that I thought, obviously I wasn't going to go into your yard to kind of experiment whether it was brighter there, but it certainly was less bright as I moved away from the roadway. So you can tell us if that's true or not. I think the higher it is in this situation, and I have to take, one thing you said was that the speed is 25 miles per hour. But we all know that there's been fatalities at this intersection, more than one.
I wondered about that, whether the light should really be at Union Hill where the fatalities have been. Because I've had two cars come through over the sidewalk and all the way through my hedge from Union
Into
Hill.
our garden.
So I'm not even sure how that's possible because it's on an uphill, but there the cars were.
Well, it's designed to be a crosswalk light, so it's at where the safe crosswalk is. And I'm on the traffic safety committee, so I do a lot of thinking about crosswalks. Crosswalks are, we've had a lot of discussions on the committee, you can back me up on this, that we'd love to have more crosswalks in many different places, but the problem is people assume they're safer when they see a crosswalk.
Yes.
So what this does, in my opinion, is makes this very dangerous spot really quite a bit safer, because I see how people stop with this fairly shocking flashing light that's coming at you at this angle. I can't confirm that at the angle of your house it's that intense. Higher to me seems safer because, as I was about to say, is the 25 miles an hour is a theory in many times during the day there. There's often cars going 45 miles an hour. I can feel it and I can see it as I'm traveling along. In fact, I'd love to see one of these at the other crosswalk, which is still quite dangerous, which goes across Union Street.
And incidentally, the MUTC guidelines all recommend that all signs be between 5 and 10 feet. So I know
Okay,
that it may
well-
seem logical to you that higher is better, but as a driver, that apparently the experts have decided differently than what you believe.
Higher's better, clearly, I think, from a distance when you're approaching
Oh, yeah.
a light, because you see it sooner and you're warned of someone being in this crosswalk sooner, which when somebody's going 40 miles an hour in a 25 mile an hour zone, they're like, uh-oh, I should really slow down here, hopefully.
I think you're
Now-
substituting your judgment for the national experts. The national experts from who
I'm
write
not
the-
interested in the national
But
experts
he
right
was-
now.
he was-
I'm on the select board and I'm giving my opinion, so that's what I'm doing
Yeah, I
right
know,
now.
it's,
But he gave us
I don't
this.
need to be in a back and forth with you. I apologize. Anyway, so I feel the light is absolutely necessary. The only thing I was thinking is that if there was any way there could be a baffle, because a baffle that stopped the light from penetrate, if the light is facing here and there was something that
Yes.
was between you,
Would that help?
your house, and the light, it would literally stop all possible light going into a bedroom, right?
Even better than lowering it below the hedge,
Yeah.
possibly.
Possibly.
but again, if you
Especially in
look
the
at the TAPCO website that Peter Elwell sent us to,
There aren't any above.
there aren't any above that sign. I mean, none, 7 out of 7. I mean, it's violation of the recommended manufacturing standards.
And I think one of the things, again, I don't think any of us are experts on traffic lights, but I think what you just said is actually a really good idea. But we weren't involved in how high anything was. And I don't think anybody here was involved in that, so we can't speak to whether that's right or wrong. Do you know what I mean? Because we weren't.
Especially since Steve Barrett's not here.
Well, that's what we're just wondering, is some of these questions only Steve can answer, which is, like your suggestion, Tim, we can ask Steve, is something like that.
And
a
we're here
doable
because we weren't
prospect?
involved, because we were told we would be
Yeah.
involved and we weren't involved.
Yeah.
And so I think that's, we definitely, like I said, we are the only residential home where a crosswalk and entrance has been put directly in front of the house. And so that makes us, I think, unique in town. We're not a business, we're not like, the Retreat, these other businesses where Barry Adams was really part of the pre-construction to redoing that whole area, and he got the original grant going to improve that intersection. He's the first community member I met. He knocked on our door and said, this is a dangerous intersection. And the grant is what gave the seed money for that whole construction. And he really emphasized the residential quality of the town. And I feel like the more lights, the more, I would call it not quite an urbanization, but a suburbanization, much like your Florida experience prior to here, where there are more lights and more signs, but it takes away from the residential quality. We live there, so we want it to be safe. Like I said, we've seen every kind of accident there in the past 14 years. So I think we can all agree on safety. But this idea that, is it a residential area? We know it has, sort of a dual place. It has business and residential, but that we live there. And this idea that there's a balance between the residential quality and the beauty of the town, and then this need for signage, et cetera, and a balance. So, I've asked for that to be weighed in.
Would you be willing to come back at a time that Steve Barrett was here, so that when we're talking technical things like what you're bringing up or what Tim's bringing up, or whether or not it's, so he should be here to answer those questions? I know that you guys are both busy, but
Yes.
Yeah, we could do it. And
Yes, thank you.
it's baffling to me just why the town's so stubborn about having it so high. I mean, that there's no support for that in anything that we are sent.
2 weeks from tonight.
Yeah. Do we want to try for 2 weeks
try
from
for 2
tonight?
weeks from
David,
tonight.
David.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Maybe that's the best way to handle it. I'm not sure. Well, we'll see if we need to. The two things that kind of stick out in this process are the, I've looked through read through these things, and I don't recall seeing anything that indicated what the level should be. And it seems like there is a claim on our part that it should be 12 or 13 feet or whatever it is. And so I would like to see some substantiation of that as an actual standard, that if we don't do that, we are liable if something goes wrong and we put it at the wrong height. Then the town of Brattleboro gets sued and everybody pays for whatever, for our error. So I need to be clear, I need to be certain that that's not, a manufacturer's suggestion, that's an actual standard that we need to align with. That would settle it for me, that you'd be stuck.
Yeah,
But if that's not the case, I would like us to look at lowering it, or I think Tim's idea might even be better,
I do too.
which is to develop some sort of a baffle, and given that we make signs and things, we know how to work with metal. We might not need Steve to come back, we might be able to solve the
Right.
problem without taking anybody else's time.
Thank you.
What I like about the baffling is in the winter, even if the sign or light was lower, it's gonna come right through your hedges without the foliage on it, whereas the baffling.
Actually, our
is
hedges are
south.
They
bleached.
keep
and-
their
and they
leaves.
keep the
Well,
leaves.
but-
Do they?
Yeah,
Okay.
Mostly.
Nice, but yeah, thank you. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Does
Thank you
anyone
for your
else?
time and consideration.
So, 2 weeks from now is
20th.
the 20th, November 20th.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe what we can do, well, we need to find out from, Steve may not have to be here if we figure out we can do,
I think
or should we have him here?
I should receive direction from the board.
Yeah.
If you want us to proceed with the baffling, which I think is likely to be physically possible, I just can't say 100% for sure that
Right.
it is. But if your action on this is that if we can baffle it, we should,
Yeah.
and that's a proper solution, then that's all I need from you this evening, and then we would come back to you if we can't baffle it. If instead you want more information about the standards and give further consideration to height and location and so on, then Steve should be present and we should give you more documentation, and you more documentation regarding the standards.
And I would like to see what this baffling is first,
looks-
because
Sure.
this idea that
Well, yeah,
things
it
get,
has
you
to
know.
work.
Sure.
I mean,
Yeah.
put something up and it doesn't work, obviously.
Right.
It has, I would say that the first.
And it's already a
Which is
visible,
Having Steve come?
No,
No,
the
to see
first
if
is
baffling
to see
works.
if we can baffle it and if it will
As-
work.
Have him
Yeah.
draw the
Solution to the
thing, what does it look
Is that-
like, how could it be done?
If that's acceptable to the
And
board
send
and
it to you.
acceptable to you, then
Yeah,
we'll
he could-
proceed.
He's been generally great to work with. We loved it. Invite him to our house and he can show it to us.
Very good.
And then we'll proceed that if the baffling for some reason doesn't work, we'll let you folks know if we need to meet on the 20th.
Great.
Does that make sense?
And you will know because we'll be communicating with you about the baffling. And I apologize again, your representation that I suggested that we would work with you in ways that I then did not get back with you, and we did not work with you is correct. We installed based on what we understand to be the standards, but without proper communication with you after the traffic safety meeting.
I
Thank you.
appreciate that, thank you.
We'll be back in touch. Thanks for coming.
Very, very well presented, thank you.
I meant to say this in the beginning and I forgot. The mural in the Harmony parking lot, agenda item.
The urinal?
Oh, mural.
Mural.
I'm sorry.
No, I don't have my hearing
I'm
aids.
eating
so
my,
it's-
the mural in the Harmony parking lot, agenda item has been taken off the agenda per Scott Borofsky. He has been talking to the town manager and gonna talk to the town arts committee. So at this point, oh, you waiting?
We don't have to do that.
Oh, I was going to suggest that you make sure that no one came, since you didn't make the announcement earlier,
Right.
that no one came to speak to it.
Did anyone come to speak to the mural on Harmony Lot? No. Good suggestion. So that is not on the agenda anymore because I think Mr. Borowski feels like everything's
Better.
working okay. Next up is the Transportation Center Resilience Hub project proposed by Green Lantern Solar. And I know we have Ralph Mima here. And what we're being asked to do is to sign a letter of intent to lease space above the Transportation Center to Green Light Solar. But I'll have Ralph, if you want to sort of talk about what you're thinking
Okay,
and let us know.
great. Thank you for having me present this idea to you and for considering our request. I think it actually goes back to an idea that Patrick contacted me about at least a year ago. I think it was you who simply said, could you put solar on top of the parking garage, the transportation center? And then that led to probably a year's worth, or close to a year's worth of conversations involving the Energy Committee, Phoebe Gooding, the attorney Bob Fisher, Patrick, myself, and a few others, just basically exploring what kind of agreement would be needed in order for us as a private company to do a feasibility study that wouldn't cost the town anything, to explore whether or not solar could be put on top of the transportation center. But in the process, the idea evolved a little bit too, because I thought, you know, maybe it is feasible to put some kind of structure up there with a net metered solar array that would basically be investor financed, pay for itself, contribute some money and tax revenue to the town, and benefit a net metering customer to be determined. But you know, with a lot of other things going on these days, and some developments in our industry as well, I thought this could also potentially be an opportunity to experiment, to put together basically a microgrid system that largely pays for itself, that would involve not only a solar array, but also a storage battery and some way to use the storage battery to charge electric vehicles, because there are already EV charging stations in the transportation center, even if the grid were down. Now, it's a relatively simple idea, and there's a lot of talk these days about storage. But to get from the idea stage to something that's actually implemented and is economically and technically feasible still involves a lot of different hoops to jump through. So, you know, I wanted to say that I can say a couple things too about our firm, just so you know, for the benefit of the public and viewers, who we are. But net metering is our daily bread, and we, at this point, well, just a couple of quick things. We were founded in 2010, and we're based up in Waterbury. Recently, a couple of months ago, we found out that we're actually, at least for 2017, we were the 20th largest solar developer in the United States, which really surprised us because we've only done projects in Vermont up to now. We are based in Waterbury because that's where our founder and CEO lives, but we're spread all over the state. And I live just a couple of blocks from here. I cover the southern counties. We've done close to 40 megawatts of total capacity in approximately 70 projects in over 50 towns all over the state. And we're literally we've done projects from Derby to Vernon to Pownell to North Hero. So we've really kind of specialized in doing net metered projects that provide net metering credits for towns and hospitals and ski areas and schools and so forth, that are typically about 1 to 5 acres in size. In other words, 150 to 5 kilowatts. We are doing a project in Essex that would be the same scale as the one up here at Wyndham Solid Waste, but that's really at the high end of what we do. So we know net metering, and we know that we could put some sort of rooftop system on the transportation center. We know we could probably get it to pay for itself and be funded through investor financing. Where things get a lot murkier, though, is when we start looking at the integration of a battery, and we look at the creation of some sort of microgrid, so that even if the overall grid were down, you'd still have this little island in the town with solar power charging the battery, and then the battery being used for some purpose. So there's a lot of engineering that has to happen, and just to go down one rabbit hole for just a moment. Around the state, you will find batteries in use. For example, in Rutland, on the old Stafford Hill landfill, there is a 1 or 2 megawatt solar array that's owned by Green Mountain Power. And they've got a couple of big batteries, like 40-foot container type storage batteries. that are connected to a high school and a few other structures around there, so that if the grid goes down, they've got a fairly robust solar-powered microgrid that would stay up. But that's owned by Green Mountain Power. You can also get Tesla Powerwall batteries and install them in your house, but they're still owned by the utility. And so there's an area where this would potentially be a pioneering project where we wouldn't be the utility, but we would still find a way to obtain certain monetary benefits or revenue streams for the battery services to the grid, separate from the value generated by the net metered solar array. And I can go into more detail if you have questions about that, but the idea is basically that if we reach an agreement tonight based on the letter of intent that's been proposed, then we would have to do a lot of research and a lot of figuring and design work, basically, to see if this is even going to work as intended. But in order for us to move ahead, we would need some sort of agreement with the town and would appreciate your consideration.
Peter, would you like to explain to us what, in a nutshell, the letter of intent is, and what are we of intenting?
Sure. So the letter of intent is actually modeled after the one that we signed a year ago with the state. That's unfortunately for us a good example of the fact that this is an expression of good faith of a desire to work together, but not a binding commitment on either party. The letter outlines, much of what Mr. Mima has just described, and it talks about how the town will not lease the space or sell the space to anyone else during the period of time that the research is going on, and that as the research is completed, if it looks as though the project is feasible and Green Lantern would like to move forward, that then there would be negotiations between the parties for what an actual lease would look like in order to proceed with the project. So the decision that the board would be making this evening is almost completely risk-free. What you'd be committing to is the reassurance that we're not interested in sort of marketing this space for any other purpose in a way that might sort of undermine the effort that Green Lantern is going to undertake, but without making a commitment that you would necessarily wish to proceed with the project. You'll be able to have a better understanding of what the project might be before you'd be making a commitment to actually lease the space. And that would be a different decision to be made months from now when the research has been done.
Right. So it's Green Lantern that's doing the feasibility study, so to speak, and then when you've done it, you can come back here and say it looks like it's feasible, or it looks like it isn't. And if it is feasible, then the town decides, well, it's feasible, but do we want to do it?
Right. And there'd be some degree of ongoing communication between the parties that would sort of lead in that direction. But the point is that you wouldn't have to make a commitment to the project until you knew what you were committing to.
Right. Right. That's good.
I think it sounds
David
good.
has a question.
Well, it comes as no surprise to Kate and probably to Patrick either, that when it comes to sort of imaginative, innovative energy projects, I'm pretty much ready, fire, aim. And I kind of feel that way about this one as well. But there's one thing that in this proposal that caught my attention, and that's the number Roman numeral 4, which actually is 5, but it's the fourth item on the bottom, about assigning the rights. Previous experience with the school district, and if I remember correctly, the town also, in assigning the solar projects that we initially signed on to in both cases, and I was on both boards promoting those, there were difficulties with the assignee. People that we knew and trusted did these projects, they were complete, and then it went to somebody else, and the conditions started to change, and the understandings changed, and the lawyers showed up, and it was unpleasant in both circumstances. One was resolved, the other we undid the agreement, dissolved the agreement. So I don't want anything like that to happen. So I would like to get a better sense, when the time comes, and with no intention of making your investors walk away, but I'd like a little bit more clarity about what the due diligence is that will enable us to reasonably not withhold our approval of an assignment.
Yeah.
So just some details on what that actually means.
Okay, I can speak to that. For a long time, that clause or that part of our lease option agreements, which constituted a lot of the language that went into that part of the letter of intent, basically gave us as the developer the freedom to assign almost without any kind of restraint. And so the language that you see there, where the town can actually do due diligence and approve assignment, is something that has come up in recent years because of situations just like the one you just described. And in fact, it's just one of these funny things, but Bob Fisher is also the attorney for the town of Wyndham. And so in a negotiation for a project in Wyndham, he suggested that language. It then went into negotiation of a similar agreement for Pownell, where Bob is also the attorney. So it's funny that it finally came back around to Brattleboro.
It started here.
Yeah, well, I guess it did. But the point is that language is robust and has been enhanced over the evolution of this particular sort of format of agreement.
So the due
for a number of
diligence
years.
means we perform the due diligence.
It's your due
Not you
diligence.
perform it and say that it's
Exactly.
okay.
It's
Okay.
your due diligence, and if you don't like who we're assigning it to, you have every right to not continue
Right.
a lease negotiation, for example.
Peter wants to weigh in on that.
Yeah, and I just wanted to reinforce that this is everything that Ralph just said is also our understanding about how this is better language than was in earlier agreements. But I also think it's a valid concern, especially because of the substantial disruption that was caused previously. We actually had some brief litigation and lots of dispute that went on going for over a year in the prior situation where we had a agreement that was assigned by somebody that we had done a deal with. So that's also a lesson that we think would be applied to whatever final language would be in an actual lease. But it's an example of where we think that the letter of intent stage that we're at allows a little more latitude. So we think that the town's actually well protected by the fact that this is better language than was previously in these kinds of agreements, but even more so by the fact that if at some point along the way you're not comfortable proceeding, you haven't committed to anything other than the opportunity to explore.
And if we sign this, if we approve signing it, it's for another year through December 31st, 2019.
Correct.
So that means before then, you folks will be coming back to us
Yeah.
saying, here's what we're thinking.
It should go quicker than that,
Yeah.
but
At the time. Does anyone in the public have any questions or comments about this?
Can you enlighten us, Daniel?
What are your feelings?
Give us a-
Do you have feelings?
Give us well, it seems like a really unique project, and it's something, these microgrids should be happening everywhere if we really want to have sustainable energy. And it seems like having one in the middle of downtown Brattleboro is an example. Would be great. That's my thinking. I was hoping you would say that.
Yeah. I mean, you kind of said it, I guess. I mean, I don't know. I'm not necessarily like some sort of solar energy expert. Like, I've worked with Ralph a little on some of his solar projects, and Ralph knows like all of the things that a person needs to know, and then some. And I guess like thinking about solar energy beyond just like generating like net metering credits, or like getting a better deal for our electricity, or even getting like cleaner electricity, and moving towards resilience, like you were talking about, so that when we inevitably are faced with crises that affect like our town's population, having more of an ability to be able to to have an electric grid that still works is gonna benefit like the health and well-being of people, and so like thinking about a project like this, it goes beyond just like some nice clean green electricity, and then speaks more to like issues of equity and health and well-being, And I was kind of wondering, as you were talking about this project, like, you know, and this is me just saying this, but like, it would be really wonderful if the people that were going to benefit from the electricity produced by that could be the people that really need to benefit from it, as opposed to investors that are choosing to invest in it because it's going to be a good financial investment. But you know, that's not really something for, I mean, I just want to put that out there. You know, Sevka recently commissioned a community solar project that will directly benefit low-income households in this part of the world. And there is, I suppose, only so much good land available for these projects. So when we, you know, say yes to a project like this, making sure that we're thinking about like who benefits from it, and you know, and looking at our most vulnerable populations and trying to make sure that they get a piece of the action. So I don't know if that's like a consideration or even a possibility, but just to kind of put it in the mix.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any comments or questions, or would someone like to make a motion?
I had a very quick thing. Sorry.
No, it's okay.
Ralph, did you say this was would be your first experience with sort of this large Tesla Powerwall type unit? Or, because you mainly do the net metering projects, and I'm just curious if you know of any examples that we could look at going forward. Because I know a little bit about the Powerwall for homes and things like that, and I used to have an off-grid home that I had storage batteries. So I'm fairly familiar with it, but I'm just curious if this reaches the size of any kind of viable, from a business perspective, a viable project, or do you see it as more of sort of a starter project to kind of explore viability of this type of thing?
Well, you raise a couple of issues,
You're right.
and I'll try to speak to them in a logical way. First of all, as far as our capability is concerned, I can say this: up to this moment, we have not built, or at least we have not commissioned, you know, switched on a solar array that has storage integrated into it. We're working on one in Essex, and it's not a net metered project. It's going to be a 5 megawatt array with, I think, 1 or 2 megawatt hours of storage that we're building for Green Mountain Power, and they will take ownership of it and operate it for their purposes. They've done similar ones in Ferrisburg and Milton. And so we're learning a tremendous amount right there on the cutting edge of how to integrate, you know, and that would be, you know, 100 times the size of what we're talking about. But nonetheless, the basic technology is the same. We're working with Tesla, with Dynapower in Burlington, and with Northern Reliability in Waterbury. We have non-disclosure agreements with all of them, and we're, you know, our engineers are talking to their engineers, and there's an awful lot of figuring out just basically how to hook these things up that's going on. Another thing is that we don't know what size battery would be appropriate for this particular project. You know, would we have something where basically there's a significant battery that is charged by the grid, and then even if, you know, if the grid goes down and you're able to charge vehicles from it, would the array be able to substantially recharge it, or just kind of give it a little bit of extra power as it's exhausted, as it's emptied, you know, as power is drained from it while the grid is down? There are a lot of big questions like that we have to answer. I think one of the lessons that might come out of this, if this kind of system is actually successfully installed, is people are going to realize how quickly vehicles drain a battery and how much solar power it takes just to keep one EV operating. And so, you know, that could be an interesting learning experience for all of us, you know, as we try to tackle this reliability issue. And there was one other twist in what you spoke to that I'm trying to remember.
I think I threw out too much, just because I think, but that's natural because there's just a lot of questions that haven't been answered yet.
Yeah. The other thing I wanted to just quickly say, though, in responding to what Daniel Quip brought up, is that at this point, we have no idea who potential off-takers or net metering customers would be from the array. The kind of thing we're talking about probably would cost somewhere in the order of $200,000 to build. I say that sort of plus or minus close to 50%, but something probably in that ballpark. And these kinds of systems cost what they cost. But there may be different ways to finance them, and there may be different ways to bring down the total investment through grants. If, like the Sevka example, we can figure out how to help the broader community benefit from it. I mean, it'll be generating revenues for the town and generating taxes for the town. But there may be other ways to bring additional benefit in that we could explore.
And I'm assuming this is the kind of thing you're going to do in the feasibility study.
Right, exactly. Yep.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? Someone like to make a motion?
I'll make a motion to authorize Town Manager Peter Elwell to sign a letter of intent to lease space above the Brattleboro Transportation Center to Green Lantern Solar.
We have a motion to authorize our town manager to sign a letter of intent to lease space above the Transportation Center to Green Lantern Solar. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries 4-0. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And we look forward to hearing back from you.
Thanks.
Is there batteries at the waste? Is there batteries at the solar array?
No.
It goes straight into the grid, I believe, at the landfill.
It goes straight to CNS wholesale, probably nowhere else. No, I'm kidding. It never gets off Ferry Road.
I charged my phone while I was there.
Was it quick? Was it fast? No.
Dan laughed.
Next up is we're being asked to award a bid for the cruiser Upfit, one of the police cruisers.
So it's actually 3 vehicles, and $146,000 was budgeted for the purchase of these 3 vehicles. A portion of that for the actual buying the vehicles themselves, 2 cruisers and an incident command vehicle, and then the balance for the upfitting. By upfitting, we mean what makes it a police car. So the lights, the sirens, the back seat that is converted into that hard plastic back seat with the cage set up so that prisoners can be transported safely, and certain other equipment that gets put into the vehicles. So the 3 vehicles were purchased for $94,684. You previously authorized that through the state contract. We proceeded with that. And now we've done competitive bidding for the upfitting. We have $51,316 available, and we have an awardable low bid to SWNH of Keene, New Hampshire for $47,088.50. So the overall purchase and equipping of these 3 vehicles will come in approximately $4,000 under budget. The police department, in putting together the recommendation on this item, did stress that they have an ongoing working relationship with SWNH. They do maintenance on our vehicles, as well as they have previously done upfitting of vehicles for our department, and we have had a positive experience with them, so we recommend your approval.
Great. Does anyone have any questions? Anyone?
Sounds
Would
good.
someone like to make a motion?
I'll move to award a bid to SWNH in the amount of $47,088.50 to upfit 3 new police vehicles with proper emergency equipment.
We have a bid to award, we have a motion to award a bid to SWNH. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries 4-0. Next up is renaming a private drive,
So moved.
which is Tavern Way off of Putney Road, and our town manager will explain why we are doing this.
This one is also coming back to you, just as the last one was a part one and a part two. This one we thought was only going to be one stop, but it's turning out to be a part one and a part two. You'll recall that back in June, you approved the naming of the driveway that goes off of Putney Road back into the Colonial Motel property as Colonial Drive. And that was to comply with what we understood to be the requirements of the E911 system in Vermont. The E911 board looked at what we did and said, well, that's a step in the right direction, but it doesn't quite get the job done. And that's because if you're familiar with that area, there's kind of a wishbone in the back part of the property. There's a spur that goes back to a couple of buildings on the right side in the rear. And then there's an area that kind of curves around the whole northern and eastern edge of the property that goes to several other buildings. What the state E911 board has said is because of that spur, you can't have it all be one name, that they want a different name on the spur versus on the longer loop. So what we have proposed, and they have already approved, subject to you making it official this evening, is that the spur be called Tavern Way and that the curving longer section remain named as Colonial Drive. And so we ask for your approval of that.
You think it might be misleading since it's actually going away from the tavern?
I think it will be not of any consequence to the public.
I think you're probably right.
I think it's really just strictly for the public safety purposes
Yeah, I
of
know.
differentiating which
Kidding.
building we're talking about. And so the buildings, the individual buildings, instead of being like Building A and Building B, are now going to have street addresses on
Right.
these two streets.
Great.
Great.
Does anyone have any comments or questions, or would someone like to make a motion?
I move that we approve the name of Tavern Way for a private drive in the Colonial Motel complex as presented.
And we have a motion to approve the name of Tavern Way. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries 4-0. Next up, we need to talk about the employee health insurance program. And our town manager will explain to us what's happening.
I will. So this is not good news, and I want to explain a little bit about what we were faced with and then how we try to deal with that and what we've brought to you as a recommendation this evening. And it'll be a good, provide a good segue into the budget discussion that we're going to have after this. Because this year's renewal of the health insurance program and the resulting impact also on next year's budget is going to be likely the most significant challenge for us in the town's budget in the upcoming months, certainly one of the major challenges. So why has that happened? We've had really good experience with our health insurance renewals the last couple of years, and we've had that good experience for a couple of different reasons. Part of it is that our claims record has been good, so just a basic renewal of existing coverages would not have been in double-digit percent increases the way is pretty normal with health insurance around the country and certainly in Vermont. But then we also made some structural changes to our health insurance plan, and we did that in order to actually, or the result of doing that was that the year we made the change, we actually substantially reduced our health insurance costs for the overall. So that's the combination of the premium and all other related expenses. And I'll describe that a little more fully in just a minute in terms of the component pieces of the health insurance program. But we were able in the year that we made the conversion, which was 2 years ago, to reduce the cost, 2 renewals ago, to reduce the cost of the health insurance program. The next year there was an increase, but it was an increase only on the order of 1%, I believe, or 1.5%. And how we accomplished that was we took on some limited risk. The town became partially self-insured through something that's called a health reimbursement arrangement. It's a term of art in the federal law that relates to what we're allowed to do and what we're not allowed to do, where the employer actually pays a portion of the deductible in between an amount that is established as being the employee's responsibility and then up to the level of the deductible that then kicks in the actual purchased insurance coverage. In our case, the purchased insurance coverage is with Blue Cross, and we had up until that transition that we went through 2.5 years ago, a traditional program where there was a deductible, and when the employees had exhausted that deductible, they immediately went into Blue Cross coverage. There is a separate piece of this program that is not changing, did not change at the time that we made our structural change in the program, and is not changing at this time either. That's an HSA as opposed to the HRA. The HSA is a health savings account program, and through that, employees are able to put pre-tax money away to be set aside exclusively for the purpose of paying medical bills, and the town makes a contribution as part of the employee benefit package. The town makes a contribution. The amount depends on whether you're single coverage or whether you're family coverage, but the town contributes money into the HSA accounts to help the employees and their families pay the deductible amount, the employee portion of the deductible amount. So, to speak more, so one more thing about that and how it had a positive impact for us, and then I want to speak specifically to these different layers. So the way that had a positive impact was we took on some risk where the town would pay that HRA layer, and initially the HRA layer was $1,500 for single coverage and $3,000 for family coverage. So we increased a deductible at that time from what had been $1,500 to $3,000 up to $3,000, $6,000. Okay, and if you want to follow along with this, the third page of the 3 pages that we provided as backup for this item is where there's a table that makes this clear. So we're looking at 2016, 2017 to see how that change got made. And what that meant was for an employee who exceeded, let's say in family coverage, a family that exceeded $3,000 worth of medical expenses, but did not exceed $6,000, they didn't actually get Blue Cross claims reimbursement at all that year. And there was only a portion of the $3,000 HRA layer that the town had to pay. The reason why it's good for us to have done this, and why we are recommending this year even a slight tweak in this to take on just a little more risk, is as long as we manage that risk wisely, and we're going to talk about why we don't want to go even further. There's an option that was presented to us as part of this renewal that would take on more risk than we think would be prudent. So there is always you got to stop and calibrate this to be appropriate risk. But the reason you want to take on some of that is because you can actually lower your overall cost. Where Blue Cross would have to charge us to protect itself from the bills that it might have to pay on our behalf, if we're self-insuring for that, we're not paying a premium, we're only paying the cost of the actual claims incurred. And so we can budget, in some cases, it depends on the analysis in the specifics of each renewal year, but in some cases we're able to budget less for the HRA layer than what it would have cost to buy Blue Cross insurance for that layer, okay? Fast forward to this year's renewal. So we had these 2 very favorable renewal years. After we restructured, we had a year when we saved money, and then we had a year when we had a very small increase. This year we were actually predicting a 4% increase. Back in the long-term financial plan that we completed this summer, we were expecting to have to increase our health insurance budget by about 4%. Basically because we didn't have as much room to take on more risk, and we were expecting that our renewal would otherwise be pretty similar to what we have seen in past years. The thing that was so different for us this year is we didn't have good claims experience. In fact, we had a substantially increased number of claims overall, and an increase in the number of very serious claims, cancers, births with complications, joint replacements, things that require extended hospitalization and higher bills than the kinds of things that we've been addressing in the past. Not to say that we've had none of those kind, but we've been really fortunate as a group. We're a relatively small group for insurance purposes. And we've been fortunate as a group to have a relatively low level of major claims. This year we had more claims and we had more major claims. And so when Blue Cross quoted us a renewal, if we had just stuck with the program, so we last year at this time, we added $500 to the single deductible and $1,000 to the family deductible, took on just a little bit more risk in the HRA layer. And if we renewed with exactly that $3,500, $7,000 deductible program, Blue Cross would have increased our premium by 17.15%. So we asked the Richards Group, who assists us with our health insurance program, to obtain some alternatives for the town to look at. We asked them to not only quote additional options with Blue Cross that would provide for additional levels of HRA risk-taking, but we also asked them to get a quote from Cigna and from MVP to see what competition in the marketplace might look like. What we found is that the competitors wouldn't bid our coverage because they knew what Blue Cross was offering as a renewal, and they didn't believe they could beat it because of the difficult claims experience that we've had this year. So we're basically viewed for this moment in time as a very high risk for an insurance carrier to take on. Blue Cross is willing to write our insurance at a lower, even though 17.15% is high, they're willing to write it for less than what the competitors would write it for. So then we looked at what's on your sheet as option A and option B. What would it look like if we did take on some more risk in order to try to reduce the overall amount of this increase? And what we found is it had a positive effect, but a pretty limited positive effect. So the one that we're not recommending would go all the way to $5,000, $10,000 from the $3,500, $7,000 deductible level. The reason we're not recommending that is if you look at the bottom line, it ends up at almost exactly the same place as if we take less risk and do $4,000, $8,000. We do think it's worth taking on the extra $500 of risk per single coverage and $1,000 of risk per family coverage, because that can achieve a savings of about $17,000. It's still a substantial increase. Instead of being about what we had expected would be on the order of, for the whole program, not just what you see here, but for the whole program, in the budget we're going to talk about in a few minutes, we were expecting to see about a $75,000 increase, and instead we're going to see a $216,000 increase in next year's budget. We'll get to that shortly. For this year to year on the insurance year rather than the budget year, what we were able to do is reduce a $269,000 increase to a $253,000 increase. But it's still very substantial. We can afford this. We need to afford this because we have an obligation to provide the coverage for the employees that matches the existing coverage. That's a collective bargaining agreement obligation that we have at this time. And so staff's recommendation after conferring with Richards and going through the process that I've just described is that, while it's still a very significant increase and it has implications for next year's budget, the best place we can get to for this year with this renewal is option A, and increasing the amount of HRA coverage to $2,500 per single and $5,000 per family.
Peter, the 12 or 13% increase, I've been hearing that in other areas of health, double-digit numbers in other areas as well.
Right.
Has everybody become more of a risk, or is this a risk and normally we would do better?
That's a good question. So there's a couple of things that go on whenever we're buying insurance of whichever kind it is. We'll find when we talk about the budget in a few minutes that we're also seeing a pretty substantial increase in workers' comp and liability coverage. The insurance, what the analysts of insurance markets, the way they refer to this is hardening or softening of the market. So there are cycles in the insurance industry, just like there are cycles in any other industry. And when the industry is sort of collectively getting nervous and being more cautious, they refer to that as the market hardening, and then everybody gets a bigger increase. They're just going to collect more in premiums. The standard median level of increase is rising so that the insurance carriers can protect themselves. Then there are times when the market becomes more competitive, and they refer to that as a softening market. Right now, we've got a double whammy happening of the actually a triple whammy because of our own personal circumstances. So the market is hardening. Our own experience within our own group was high level of claims, and we have less room to modify the structure because we already sort of took the big benefit on that. We made the change that we made and got a good benefit out of that. And now we're in a situation where we can only tweak it a little bit more and get a little bit more benefit. I will say, having been previously accused of and pleading guilty to relentlessly looking for bright sides and things, there's not much of a bright side to offer here, except we should be glad that we made the change that we did a couple of years ago. So, we had the year that we saved money, we had the year when it went up just a little bit and we weren't yet back up to the level of expense from 2 years ago. That was a pretty remarkable place to be in providing health
field,
insurance
yeah,
on this
absolutely.
scale. Reality has come home with this renewal, and so now we're in a place where we are going to have to incur a substantial cost increase and be at a level that is materially higher than where we were 3 years ago, but still quite far below where it would have been if we had just ridden with the market over that time.
And the reason we're being asked to act tonight is because it's a renewal and we need to solidify
That's
what we're
correct.
doing.
So there's
Okay.
two different things going on. This needs your action so that we can actually enroll people for the new year. The new plan year begins on January 1st. And then we'll be looking at the longer term impacts in terms of how it affects next year's budget.
Okay, great. Does anyone have any questions? Select board or public? Yes. Introduce yourself to the crowd.
Franz Reichman, District 2. I wonder, you say there were two parts of the claims experience in the past year, one of which was the severity, but the other was kind of the number of claims submitted. Do you have any further detail on how that balanced out? And what I'm thinking in actuarial terms is which one of those is more likely to be predictive of future trends?
Right.
And is there some kind of actual change in our health insurance culture that is taking place at this point that would push us in one direction or another?
Sure. Those are really good questions. I don't have data to support this. To the degree that either one of those is something that would be expected to have a continuing impact, I think the major claims are a greater concern than the number of claims. I think the number of claims is something that's going to vary. It's not like we've been encouraging people to go to the doctor more, or that there's something that we've perceived in society that's encouraging people to go to the doctor more. We had a year when collectively town employees and our families consumed more medical services. But I think the greater driver that might continue on, not for the long term, but in the short term, as major claims continue to play out, is the ones. So let me differentiate between, say, a joint replacement, which was an expensive thing for this year, but then hopefully the person's going to fully recover, or the people who have had that will fully recover and be healthy and robust and not have continuing impact of this program, say next year or the year after. Compared to people who have other types of major claims that have a continuing impact, either with a chronic illness or with something very serious that maybe isn't going to affect us for years, but might well affect us for the next couple of years.
Anyone else have any other questions?
I had a quick question. Do our employees pay premiums?
Our employees do not pay premiums. The town switched. The employees used to pay a premium, and I don't know exactly when this happened. It was before I arrived here. If you know a year, say it out, Patrick. Otherwise, we'll just say several years ago.
It could have been 2012. It might have been 2013.
The town
right around in there.
Town switched to a high deductible plan, and at that time, the decision that was made was that employees would no longer contribute to the premium, but would have, in the case of a single person, $750 of exposure out of their pocket over the course of the year for the consumption of services. In the case of a family, $1,500 out of their pocket. And the program has maintained at that level since that time.
Except the deductibles were going up.
The deductibles have gone up, but then the deductibles when the deductibles went up, we created the HRA layer.
Right.
So the town is paying the claims that are in the HRA layer. And we did that in order to honor the commitment we had made to the employees through the collective bargaining agreements, that the $750 exposure for a single person, and $1,500 for a household would not increase during the course of the term of the agreement.
I see. So with all of these considerations, the impact to our employees is going to be minimal.
0 in this renewal, yes.
Okay.
Excellent.
Any other questions? Someone like to make a motion?
I move we approve the town's calendar year 2019 health insurance program, including an increase in the deductible to $4,000 for single coverage and $8,000 for family coverage, and an increase in the HRA layer to maintain maximum plan participant liability of $1,500 for single coverage and $3,000 for family coverage.
We have a motion to approve the town's calendar year 2019 health insurance program. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries 4-0. Now we have a little presentation on the budget, and the town manager is going to explain how we're going to handle this.
So it will be a little presentation tonight, well described,
Thank you.
because you've just received your budgets this evening. Our work is ahead of us, hopefully beginning a week from tonight, and then in the several weeks that follow on into mid and late January. But tonight I hope just to kind of set the table for that by hitting a few highlights and lowlights, but identifying some challenges and some things that are actually improving in our financial condition, and in the some things that have actually improved in budget line items as well. So I'll just move straight to, if it's okay with you, the 2-page summary that is, if you open your budget books to the overview. The first 7 pages are the budget message. It gives quite a lot of detailed description of what's going on in this budget, and I won't go through that because that's, I think, too deep in the weeds for tonight. And then what comes beyond is the detailed budget that we're going to go through piece by piece, week by week. Right after the budget message, behind a sheet that is labeled FY19 to FY20 budget comparison summary, there's a 2-page summary of the budget. That's what I'm going to be speaking from for the next 5 or 10 minutes. Okay? Okay. So first, we'll go to the bottom line first, because it's always, it's how it's going to hit every household and every other taxpayer in town. We're always concerned about how many cents increase on the property tax rate will any particular budget require. And so I want to tell you that the number is 3.69 cents. And I want to tell you that that's a higher number than we intended and hoped for, particularly coming out of last year, when both the work that we did as here as a staff and select board, and then the additions that were made at town meeting, the increase was actually over 5 cents last year. We actually moved forward in a number of different ways. This year, our expectation had been that we would be under 3 cents, and we would have solidly been under 3 cents if not for the health insurance renewal that I just described.
Now, can I clarify one thing
Sure.
before we go on? This is the budget that you're proposing to us. This is
Sure.
not how it might end up. I just want to clarify
Well,
that for people watching.
Sure.
Do you know what I mean?
Yes,
Like,
I know
this
what
is
you
the
mean. I hope
program.
everybody else knows what you mean
Rob, I
too,
just wanna make
because
sure we're at the table.
we got a lot of work ahead of us. This
Yeah.
is the night when we begin to do
If
the
we were
work.
done
so-
tonight, we wouldn't be scheduling
No,
additional
but
meetings
I
as
just
the
want
next
to say,
item.
if anybody is watching and is not watching the election results, that what they're hearing about tonight is the proposed budget.
And
that we've
I'd
got
go even
longer
further
to go.
than that. So it's staff's proposed
Right.
budget, right? So I've been working together with the department heads, and they've been working with people within the departments to refine numbers, to bring you our best estimate of what things are actually going to cost in areas where there's just costs we have to absorb, and then recommendations on certain things about, if we spend a little bit more money on this, we might be able to maybe achieve a savings on that. You'll see there's a couple of places we're going to talk about where we've actually eliminated positions, because there's areas where we don't need a whole person full-time to do a job, but we can contract for a portion of the work that person was doing and actually save the town money. But in order to do that, it requires an increase in the cost of the contracting for services in 2 departments. So there's some trade-offs like that we're going to describe to you. It is not only true, it is true, but not only true that this is a proposed budget that is subject to small changes and big changes, but even when we're done, and we won't be done for 2.5 months, but when we get done and at the end of January, you're ready to send a budget on to town meeting, that is still a proposed budget. It's just the select board's proposed budget at that point. It's town meeting in March that will decide once and for all what's in the budget. So there's a lot of work ahead of us, and there's many opportunities for the public to be involved and for changes to be made. What we're bringing to you as a proposed budget would require a 3.69 cent increase. I'm going to explain briefly tonight and hope to be able to demonstrate to you in the weeks ahead that we've actually squeezed out of this the things that are more optional, because we realized that if we were at 3.69 on a maintenance budget, to come to you and say, yeah, but wouldn't it be really great if this year we could XYZ, and be at 4 cents or higher, that was just not a responsible place for us to be. And so we haven't done that. We actually, until the health insurance renewal came in, we had a few things like that we were prepared to propose to you. We have taken those out because we don't think this is a year to do that. So an example of something like that is last year when I asked you to fund, and you approved, and town meeting approved, the creation of the HR position. It was a $60,000 increase to the budget. We have nothing like that this year because it's a year when we're just not in a position to be able to propose such a thing. If we hadn't had, just to give you the sense of scale of what we're dealing with, if we had had what we were expecting for a health insurance increase more on the 4% range rather than the 12%, 13% range, we would have been at 2.47 cents instead of 3.69 cents. If all the other aspects of the budget were the same, but we were only increasing the health insurance number by $75,000 instead of $216,000, we'd be at about 2.5 cent increase. So getting more into some of the details, but not too deep, I want to point out a couple of positive things on the revenue side is that rooms and meals tax has been really increasing significantly in recent years. The state doesn't share much information with us about that, so it's really hard to tell exactly what's driving that. I think that anybody who spends much time in downtown Brattleboro knows that the restaurants are doing well. We have a few more than we used to have, and they all seem to be pretty healthy.
Or Putney Road and Canal Street.
Yes,
as well.
Thank you. And on Putney Road and Canal Street, and in West Brattleboro, yes. So, the establishments that sell food and beverages are doing pretty well, it looks like, and there's some evidence to support that. We also know that statewide, the state is now collecting from Airbnb. That's very much, behind the curtain in terms of what municipalities or the public can see. So it's really hard to gauge whether to what degree the increases we've seen in the last couple of years are affected by the fact that the state is collecting rooms tax on Airbnb stays. But what we know is that we've had substantial increases over the last few years, and what we're proposing for FY20 is a $55,000 increase over the FY19 budget, because it's the exact amount that we actually received in FY18. In the fiscal year that just closed, we collected $421,000 of rooms and meals tax from the state, and so we're budgeting $420,000 for FY20. That's why you see it being so much higher than the FY19 budget. We just hadn't made that adjustment last year, and we think it's appropriate and not overly aggressive to make it this year.
Is this the first year you're putting it right at the line of actual income?
It is. What we've done in past years, we've kind of incrementally increased, but we were also seeing small incremental increases. When we go over revenues next week, we'll show you a multi-year history of this, and the increases were $5,000 or $10,000 a year. Some years it was flat, so you couldn't really count on any kind of an increase, and so we didn't want to plan for that. Since now flat from last year to this year would be at $420,000, we thought it was actually a responsible thing to do to put this number into the budget. Yeah. And then the in lieu of taxes number is also increasing because of HCRS and now Retreat Farm paying a voluntary fee in lieu of taxes.
Excellent.
We've actually made a little bit of progress. It's only a very little bit of progress in that area because, as you know, we don't have the authority to impose a pilot. The state reserves that for itself, but we will continue to seek opportunities, and we've had a little bit of success there with achieving voluntary payments from those two taxpayers. So that's increased our concrete expectation in that for that line item by $16,000. Skipping down over the next several, which are not really material changes. These are things that we'll go over in greater detail next week. If you agree to the schedule that we've proposed, next week would be the review of the revenues, and we'll go through each line item at that time. But two other things in revenues I wanted to highlight are at the very bottom, the miscellaneous item is increasing by $62,000. $58,000 of that is in the investment income. You'll recall that we proposed and you approved several months ago that we moved some money out of excessively safe and not a place where it wasn't earning enough interest to a place that is still very safe. It's completely liquid, it's fully insured, but it's now earning some interest at a market rate, and that's we believe conservatively is going to bring $58,000 more revenue in for next year. Excellent. So we feel really good about that one. It takes actually it offsets some of the pain that we've experienced elsewhere in the budget. And then one other item I want to point out, not because of what it represents in terms of an incremental change, but because of what it represents in terms of a philosophical commitment that I've been recommending pretty relentlessly for the last 4 years, and you've been mostly embracing, you and your predecessors, which is to use fund balance for capital purposes and not just as a balancing number. So you'll see in the fund balance number, the budget that we're proposing for FY20 is $295,000. That's a number that's driven explicitly by the fact that we are $295,000 above the 10% marker at this time. At the year end fiscal 18, we were actually 294,862 or something like that. I don't remember what the exact last three digits were, but it was 294 and change. So we're recommending that 295 of excess fund balance be part of the transfer to capital. We'll talk about that in a moment under the expenditures. And so that's how that number was derived. The reason it's a lot less than last year is last year we had a lot more available fund balance. So we had a transfer of $770,000 last year. Under expenses, I wanted to just point out that under salaries, we have an overall increase of just 1.2% town-wide, and certain departments are actually going down. You see that in the assessor's office and you see it in the planning department. That reflects what we talked about earlier this evening about the judgment call that we made. There was some transition in each of those two offices. They're relatively small teams that work in those two locations of the town government. And we thought there were opportunities to be, to accomplish the work as well or better and be leaner by relying a little bit more in the case of the assessor's office and materially more in the case of the planning office on contracted services. And in the case of the assessor's office, we've eliminated a part-time position, and in the case of the planning department, we've eliminated a full-time position. And so that's why you see actual decreases in the salaries for those two locations. The one other thing I wanted to point out about salaries is something that just would look like an anomaly if I didn't describe it to you. So if you look down at the facility maintenance and municipal center line items, you see a place where something's been created at facility maintenance. There's a line item that didn't exist before. It was $137,997 in a place that had zero last year. And at the municipal center, zero this year as compared to $60,669 last year. The reason for that is that is indicative of something. It's not the whole evidence of it, but it's indicative of that consolidation that we've done with the building maintenance services. So as we expanded the town's facilities, and we were trying not to expand our facilities maintenance staff, we did take a part-time position and turn it into a full-time position 2 years ago. But then what we did was we took those 4 positions and made a unit out of them so that they can be more nimble. They can move around from facility to facility to take care of what is needed. You'll remember that in last year's budget, we proposed and you approved and town meeting approved a pickup truck for that unit to use as part of its service to the different facilities around town. So what we've done with this year's budget is consolidated those 4 salaries into one location so that it can be tracked like the other work units of the town. And that's what that $137,997 is. because one of those individuals actually worked in the, in the municipal center, or had a was shown in the municipal center budget. That's why you see salaries at the municipal center going to zero in this proposed budget. There is some impact in a couple of other departments, and we'll talk about the particulars of that when we talk about those other departments. Okay?
Yep.
And then I won't say anything more about the health insurance. We've talked about it plenty, but there's 4 line items that together make up the health insurance program that are in the middle of the employee benefits cluster up at the top of the second page of this table. And you can see that that's where we show the $216,000 increase that we're incurring for that benefit. In department expense, I want to make the point that I really think that the department heads have been just as lean as they can be with this. It's not to say that there isn't, scrutiny that you should give to this, but department expenses, these are the things that are bought and the services that are bought by the department. So it's not the people expenses, not the big capital items, but just the basic operations. It's essentially flat. It's proposed to increase by 1.8%, but the bulk of that is actually in the planning department and the assessor's office, where the increase here is because of the savings in the reduced personnel costs, right? This is where we pay for the contracts that are actually going to be the more efficient way to provide that service. So if we were to lower this number by cutting those departments, we'd either not get the work done, or we'd have to not save on the positions. So we think this is actually the right way to go about it. And if you take those out, the only other material increases in the fire department, and that's mostly driven by a utility cost that's related to the new facilities. So there's really no discretionary increases going on here. One thing to note about a savings that's noted here, the $15,000 reduction in department expense for the finance department is because we are in the final stages of implementing a change in how we process payroll. We're taking much of that in-house that we used to contract for. We're using some software that we purchased, and it's going to reduce the overall expense. We'll have to pay for the software maintenance for the package that we're going to use to process payroll, but we'll have more hands-on control. We expect hopefully to have fewer mistakes, not that we've had a ton of them, but a payroll mistake is always an awkward one. So we think we'll have more control and better accuracy. And we know we're going to have cost savings because the cost of maintaining the software package is less than the cost of contracting for payroll services. So there's a $15,000 savings in finance. Under general, near the bottom of the page, debt service is increasing by $31,000 and a little bit more because of the $40,000 plus $45,000 or so that is the increase. Remember, we had $15,000 in last year just to cover the interest on the borrowing for the fire truck, for the ladder truck. This is the first year of full payment at just shy of $60,000. So there's about a $45,000 increase there. We knew it was coming. We knew this was the place it would hit the budget. There's a decrease in other debt service for prior bonds that the town is in the process of repaying. And so the net increase to debt service this year is going to be $31,125. That's not a number we can cut, or really doesn't need further review, because that's a calculated number. That's the money we actually owe on the debt that we've already incurred. And then the $97,225 increase in risk reflects the hardening of the liability and workers' comp market. Substantial increases there too. We'll talk about those in more detail on another night. Workers' comp, it's also still having some residual impact from some years of bad experience that we had. We've made some changes in that area. We've got more work we need to do in order to do our part of the job of keeping those costs as low as we can. There'll be some delay in seeing the benefit of that because of the actuarial process, where it's multiple prior years that affect the calculation of a premium for this year. But we think we can get that number down on the workers' comp side. Liability, not so much, and there's just an increase we're going to need to bear there in order to buy the property and liability insurance to protect the town financially. And finally, at the bottom of the page, bless you.
Thank you.
This is where you see the other part of that conversation about fund balance. So the transfer to capital is proposed to be $1,295,000. That's a reduction from last year, but the most important part of that $1,295,000 is it's $1 million of cash plus the $295,000 of available fund balance. We've been working hard over the last several years to push ourselves to be committing $1 million of cash to capital each year. It still really isn't fully funding our needs, not on the project side. We'll show you some detail on the vehicle and equipment side in a couple of weeks when we do the capital budget, where we believe we actually are now in a position to look at 25 years worth of capital needs for vehicles and equipment and manage those costs in a way that we really think we are on top of that and it's financially sustainable. On the project side, we still are in a situation and will remain in a situation for the foreseeable future, I think, where it's like what is most urgent at any given moment that we're needing to address because we've got old facilities and old infrastructure and more needs than we have money for. But it's a real achievement for us as a community to have gotten to the place where we've got $1 million of cash going into capital. I hope that we're able to keep ourselves there as we go through this budget process. And the last thing of the numbers that are shown on this page is the transfer to solid waste. We've increased by $40,000. You'll remember that each of the last 2 years we've had to make a transfer in the springtime because of lower than expected bag sales, because we've had such great success in the program with so much material diverted to compost and recycling, and then the increased cost of recycling because of changes in the global markets. We've made 2 substantial mid-year transfers to solid waste. We think that we are getting that, we hope, closer to an equilibrium. $40,000 is a substantial increase, but we think it's sufficient to position us to where we might not have to make that springtime transfer. Frankly, there's so much uncertainty in the international recycling markets that's a educated bet more than it is a analyzed defensible number, but we think that it is reasonable to have the increase at this level. The last thing I'd like to say is that there are documents that are not yet included in your budget package that we'll be bringing forward in the weeks ahead. I've mentioned the 25-year chart that's going to show every piece of equipment that we plan to replace over that period of time, some of them a few times during 25 years, some of them just once, like fire trucks. And then you also asked us to bring you the pricing of a code enforcement position. We are in the process of looking at that as an actual program rather than just a position. We don't have any intention of asking that be funded through taxes. What we do want to do is bring you something that relates what an increase in the level of service would look like by adding a code enforcement position and what the fee structure would look like in order to support that position. So we'll be bringing that forward. And the last thing is we don't believe that this is the year to add a sustainability officer because we don't believe that there is a non-tax source of revenue to support it. But we know that there's been some interest in that from the community. And so as we look ahead to the schedule of meetings, we ought to have an evening when there's an opportunity for the members of the public that have been working on that to come in and present to you on that topic.
Yeah, and I don't want to stifle comments and questions, but right now what we're going to do is lay out the plan on where we talk about this budget.
Yep.
So not necessarily have to talk about any of this stuff tonight because we haven't read it.
No.
So, right?
I'm down with that, totally.
Okay. Thank you for that presentation, by the way. I didn't need to leave.
You're welcome.
So the proposed dates would be next Tuesday, the 13th. Then it goes, that would be a special meeting on the 13th. Regular meeting, November 20th. Special meeting, Tuesday, November 27th. Regular meeting, December 4th. And a special meeting on Tuesday, December 11th.
Correct.
Those are and of course, if we need more, we can keep going. But does that sound like it might work for everybody?
Sounds as expected.
Yeah, we've pretty much been expecting it since August. So.
Good.
Okay.
And just for the public's benefit, the topics for next week would be going through all the revenues and then the departmental budgets for the police department and the fire department.
And if anyone's interested, they can get all of these documents on the town website.
Absolutely.
So you can follow along at home.
In fact, they're available from you can click on the right-hand side of the homepage where it says budget documents or proposed budget. And it'll take you right to where there's several different PDFs, so you can look at the part of this that you wish to look at.
Great, thank you for that posting.
Thank Jan.
Thank you, Jan.
And there are
for the
paper
quick
copies
links.
right on the table.
So everybody's okay with the schedule?
Yes.
Okay.
Excellent. Thank you.
No, thank you. This is, while we're waiting for election results, we can leave it there. There's no other items on the agenda. Would someone like to make a motion to adjourn?
I'll move to adjourn.
We have a motion to adjourn. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries 4-0, and we'll see everybody same time next week for budget.
Yes.
Thanks, everybody.
All right, time to go to the election watching party.
You go into the barn.
Yeah, I'm going to McNeil's to go to Emma.